Global producers, distributors, and rights holders, why are you waiting for license fee payments from your productions, both new and back catalogue? Pipe buys your entertainment receivables and turns it into upfront capital immediately. Pipe can help you pull forward up to 5 years worth of contracted license fees from all the major streamers and broadcasters, so you can use the capital to produce more, acquire more, finance more, and grow your business on your own terms. Sign up today at pipe.com/entertainment. That's pipe.com/entertainment and start fast forwarding your receivables now.
TellyCast, the TV industry news review.
Hi, I'm Justin Crosby, and welcome to another TellyCast. On this week's show, we're revisiting the co-production Evolved panel, the session that wrapped up the first TellyCast Content Funding Festival last month. The panel features Buccaneers' Richard Tulkhart, Drive's Lilla Hurst, and Quintus Studios' Gerrit Kemming. It was moderated by Amanda Groom from The Bridge and recorded on Tuesday, 26th of April, 2022 at Lincoln's Inn in London. Thanks to our panel sponsors, Drive. I hope you enjoy the show.
Co-pros are expanding increasingly, as we know. Most of us here will understand why. I've got the most terrific panel here. So first of all, let me introduce Richard Tulkhart, co-CEO of Buccaneer Media. Many of you will know Richard. Lilla Hurst, co-founder of Drive TV, co-production specialist. Many of you will know Lilla. In fact, you'll know everybody. And Gerrit Kemming, who Quintus Studio, a distributor, channel owner, very interesting sort of future-facing business model behind Gerrit. So welcome, everybody. Can I now please ask you to introduce yourselves and sort of generally how you work with your company in co-production?
As you say, Buccaneer, we're a non-fungible production company. No, we're very much a sort of a standard production company in the scripted space. We have 4 scripted shows going this year across very different models in each case, and now starting to line up shows for next year. But there's nothing too complicated about us. We're an indie that makes shows.
Very successfully as well. Lilla?
Yeah, I jointly run Drive with Ben Barrett. We launched in 2013 and we started out purely working with indies to raise co-production and pre-sale finance for their shows. And then in 2016 launched the distribution arm of the business because we just found it a little bit emotional letting go of these shows that we'd helped to kind of grow from their infancy to completion. And so they're kind of parallel businesses now. We're very much still involved in co-production, but we're also a distributor just completely across the kind of non-scripted and factual side of things.
Gerrit?
Quintus, so I would see ourselves more as a green light enabler than a proper co-production company. Because what we do is we're throwing both of our heads in the ring, which is the distribution and the third-party potential contribution from broadcasters, as well as our own channels and the revenues that comes from the own channels. And the money from all of this that will be generated over the next month and years for a project is what makes the partner give the power to realize the project.
And in fact, really, the co-production remains, isn't it, the heavy lifter of the industry that isn't the sort of for the payment on delivery model. But Gerrit, you're shaping Quintus in a different way because you're able to leverage both as a distributor and as having your own channels. Do you want to drill down a bit more into how you work?
I think the beauty of the model, how we do it is actually that we, as I said before, we have both. So we have the infrastructure of doing the distribution and get broadcasters on board as pre-sale partners, as co-producers, or in sales later on. But we also have our own channels that generate revenues in each territory of this globe. So we can always decide: are we making more money for us and for the project and for the production company? Are we making more money through our own channels in a certain territory? Or will the offer from a broadcaster will bring more money to the table, and then we can still start after the license period runs out? So we got two options in each territory, and sometimes that even works out that we can leverage one with the other by, when we get in an offer and say, oh, sorry, we get more money or we expect more money from our own channels, we can throw this back as feedback to the broadcaster, and they might raise their offer to still get the rights for this. So that is
gives you some leverage. Thank you. Richard, high-end co-productions, proper co-productions, and you will have heard the word CoPro mentioned a lot today. Even bankers say that they are a CoPro partner. It's not strictly true, is it? What's a pure CoPro?
Yeah, I think CoPro does get banded around quite a lot in our industry. And for me, the real definition of a co-production is where you have ourselves, Buccaneer, and another production company working together to produce something. You're in a 50-50 partnership to get the creative to where you want to get it to be and to take it out. Equally, a co-production can be where you've got two commissioning partners, say in UK, Germany, or UK, Italy, whatever it may be, and they've got similar voices in the room. A lot of what we do at Buccaneer, and I guess this is more from my background in distribution, and equally the people that I used to sell to are now buying in a sort of co-production type way, is to piece together from a commission then a number of other territories that then maybe you require extra financing, whether that be from a distribution company, an NFT apparently, or by any other sort of means. That's not a co-production. I mean, that's a commission with a number of territories pulled together in pre-sales, which is a very different thing. But I think with what we're seeing and what we've heard about, today with some of the new financing models that are coming into play, we're certainly speaking to a number of these people at the moment ourselves. I think that they're all coming with different models, and some of them really don't work, I don't think. But some of them are actually quite interestingly, and in general, the ones that seem to me to work, or maybe it works for Buccaneer, maybe it doesn't work for somebody else, but tends to be with people who have had a background in the industry, so really understand it from beginning to end, rather than coming at it from maybe a banker or whoever it may be. So I think, that there's lots out there for us as producers to get hold of at the moment. I think we also need to be quite careful about what we do end up partnering with, because of the long-term impact of what that might mean.
Aha, we'll come on to that. It's all about revenue waterfalls, isn't it? Lilla, do you want to fill in? Because and I know this from the bridge, it is a full-time job to be managing a CoPro in addition to the producers. So do you want to tell a little bit about how you work?
Yeah, I mean, I'll definitely echo what Rich has said in that, as far as we're concerned, the co-production is definitely one whereby you have editorial partners, not just money. It's the people who are the editorial stakeholders in the project. And anything outside of that really is a pre-sale. And there are these other, horrible things kind of entering into the conversation, like acquisitions, which is such a horrible word.
Has everybody heard of an acquisition?
Yes, it's basically I'm going to give you peanuts, but in exchange I want you to kill yourself and do everything I ask you to do in the production. Our job very much is, we sit in the middle of the editorial stakeholders and also the pre-buyers. There's no doubt we're obviously very involved in that. We're a kind of matchmaker. We want to make sure that the stakeholders are editorially aligned. And then once we've negotiated the deal on behalf of the producer, in a weird way, we start out at the beginning of the process representing the producers and, raising finance so they can go into production. And then once we've actually raised the finance, we almost flip to the other side. And our role is to represent the stakeholders and the broadcasters and to ensure that what they get is what they paid for. And we're not doing that out of generosity. We're doing that so that they want to work with us again. And no one cocks up along the way. So I think it's a sort of light touch executive producer role.
Thank you. Garrett, what about with yourself? Because your model is different. How is your CoPro Club, your co-production club, working in this regard?
So the CoPro Club plays into us being a green light enabler, as I said before. So the CoPro Club is an initiative that we launched a couple of months ago, which is actually we call it the Tinder of factual content funding, because what we're trying to do is to find enough partners to get a project off the ground, right? So in some cases, it might be enough to just partner up with a production company who is flexible enough to think about the potential and put in their own money or defer cost to a later stage and therefore reduce the budget which we can come up with. So sometimes that might work, but mostly it's important to get 1 or 2 or 3 pre-sale partners on board as well. And to do this, what we realized the most efficient way is to get all the potential interested parties to one table, or let's say in one video call. What we did is we launched a internet platform where we invite every 3 months, when we got enough new ideas, we invite pre-selected buyers from broadcasters to watch the sizzle of an idea and the information. And this platform is available for 1 week, and they then rate this idea if it's interesting for them or not. And everyone who was interested in the pre-sale or co-production, so who is interested in that idea, will be invited in to joining the CoPro Club for this project. And we will then have a discussion with all of them, and straight away within one call realize if or under which conditions how many partners are combined in this project and go on from there. As opposed to, sending a pitch deck to partner A, waiting for 2 months.
Yeah, it's really accelerating the whole model.
Sending it to partner B, and then 1.5 years later, we are at a stage where we can say, oh no, this won't happen.
No, it's really accelerating the whole model. It's brilliant.
So that's what
And I've got a question here. Tell us about your channels. Can you drill down into some of the detail of your channels,
sure.
into the content?
So the channels are mainly platform agnostic channel brands. So we have our main platform is YouTube, but we're growing into Facebook, Snapchat, fast channel versions of it, and they are completely non-scripted. We got our first channel, and the biggest one is a very generic mainstream documentary channel. We got a history channel, a nature channel, a business-related channel, a shorts documentary channel, paranormal. So every genre that you can ask for in the documentary space or the factual space, that is our channels. Whatever works on these channels well and has high potential in the international distribution world, or high potential for being sold internationally, that qualifies for us to be we call it Quintus Original, and where we partner up with a production company to think about how we get this greenlit.
And also, can we expand a bit on how you're using short form as almost a test case?
The ideal project has not only high potential on our channels based on the data that we got, not only high potential in international sales, but also is story-wise tellable in short form pieces, because what we do is not only exploit the long form on our channels and in the distribution, but also exploit it on Facebook as a let's say 10-minute version, on Snapchat as a 5-minute version. So these pieces are very important because all revenue together make the project a successful project.
Okay, thank you. Richard, you've got a range of different models that you're working, almost like a portfolio of models. Can you talk us through some of those?
I mean, firstly, in terms of the setup of the company, we have as a financial backer a distribution company, which gives us, it's useful, it's a shorthand. We can have that conversation on a regular basis if we've got a deficit that needs to be filled. So that's very helpful. We're also owned by participants. So in that, we've got the sort of £800 gorilla in LA that can help with what we do over there, access to talent, etc. So those two things work well, which then brings it to the projects, which ultimately, in terms of how we've set the slate up, is I sort of view the world differently now with where you've got the SVOD players that will come in and just take world rights on a show. I mean, I think we all heard the very loud bang of the bubble with Netflix the other day. But content's going to be required for certainly a long, long time. It's just going to be how it's done. So, there's the straightforward, quick and easy. They take world, and there's no partners to speak to other than the one partner. But, I think that's, not necessarily rare, but they're hard to find, and they tend to be very, very big budget shows. So we have one of those that goes later in the year. Then we have another show that is an SVOD service that only picked up the UK It hasn't been announced yet, but then that was pieced together with Tinder. And that's been pieced together with financing from Australia, from New Zealand, one of these financing outfits that weren't here today, but has an interesting model, plus distribution. To Lila's point about the voices that then come from doing that's a big part of managing scripted shows. Is too many voices in the room on a scripted show can really damage the project. So, there is the commissioning voice, which should always be heard. But more and more, the soft money that you can get is the commissioner in a way. I mean, it's the biggest piece of the puzzle in some of the shows that we're doing. One show that we've got going is going to be filmed across Norway, Greece, Canada, and potentially some in Kyiv. The story is a true story that follows those countries. Those countries happen to be, apart from Norway, very good for soft money. So when you actually pull the financing together on something like that, the biggest effort goes into maximizing the soft money, which then makes the rest of it easier and you can put more on screen. So there's those shows that sit, I think, very much in the broadcaster space. And then there's the shows that we have that we gear towards the broadcasters more than we would, say, the SVOD services, but equally you could just scale up the budget and turn it into an SVOD show as well. So it's sort of like recognizing the landscape and then fitting everything together. It's about pulling it together at the same time. I think the key with Buccaneer is the only thing we ever talk about is the voice that runs through the show and the story. And my view is, even if that show is, the one thing you hear the whole time, period is not for us. We're not doing period at the moment. And then the following year, their period show is the biggest performing show on their service or channel. What is the point in saying to a commissioner, what are you looking for? Because by the time you've got it ready, they're not looking for that. So it's always about the voice. It's about giving writers, we essentially just put our arms around writers and let them do what they want to do. And we have a stable of incredible writers. Equally, we'll do, co-production work as well. But the focus has always been around getting the creative right, and the rest will follow. And I think we're sort of starting to prove that's the case. Lockdown was a great period for development. I think we just were able to really, really focus on the development. And we're now bringing to market, I think, better shows than maybe we would have done prior to that, where we didn't have that period of time to just get on with the creative.
How long does it take you to get this piece together, like from the first time you read that script?
Minimum 2.5 years.
Yes.
And upwards of 7, 8, and
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, it sort of, but a minimum, I would say, is 2.5 years. Yeah.
There's an interesting thing here which connects through to an earlier panel on funding. Of really, this whole day has sort of caught producers almost reclaiming some of the ground, because that's what you're doing in a way, Richard. You're sort of saying this is the voice of this show. We're not waiting for the broadcaster to say this is what we want.
Yeah,
you're saying this. We think this is a terrific story, and we will back this.
Yeah, it's just, you have to have confidence in what you do, confidence in the people you're working with, and there's so much that is out of your control that there's no point in trying to control it. But I think now more than ever, there is this sort of war, and I think the broadcasters need to step up. And everything is more expensive. It just is, whether it's the cost of talent or the crews, or every year it's just going up and up and up. I mean, we're on season 2 of a show about to start in August, where it's 15% more expensive than it was when we shot last year. And that's just, it's a fact. It's not a producer trying to get more money. It just is that. And if broadcasters want to play in the world of co-productions of high-end scripted shows, then they also need to follow that. And you can't just say, oh, the SVODs are coming, and well, yeah, they are. But there is a way now with the major territories to pull together £3 million an episode of a show, on a show, and that's going to deliver your high-end scripted shows. An argument's the wrong word. It just feels like there's a continual conversation sometimes feels a bit circular, but now is coming together with broadcasters starting to really step up.
I've got a question here. What does soft money mean?
Money you don't have to pay back.
So government agencies, for example, Asia brings in a lot of soft money you don't have to pay back.
Yeah, I mean, if you're bringing a show to Greece, then it's good for Greece. So Greece has a thing in place where you can, for every euro you spend in Greece, claim back 40% against certain things, not exec producer fees, unfortunately, but lots of other things. So it ends up being a very big part of the financing. It's, like Lila said, it's free money.
And Lila, can we move on to revenue waterfalls, what everybody really is interested in? Where does the money come back in? And the importance of understanding when you go into a co-production how the money's going to come out.
You know, it's not, that side of it's not a very dark art, I don't think, in what we do. It's, in general, interestingly, when I started working in co-production, broadcasters often were, if they were investing 50% of the budget, they were expecting 50% of the net receipts. That's all gone. I very, very rarely have to haggle with a broadcaster now over net receipts. But what obviously we see much more now is distributors investing against rights because there's a shortfall on the budget. And so, and they're always going to want to recoup in the first position. So that's most of the time, that's your first waterfall. I'm just about to do a deal at the moment, which involves a kind of private financier as well. And we've managed in that scenario still as the distributor to be able to recoup our investment in the first position, and then they're going next. But to be fair, I think we've only managed to do that because they know that we've already lined up a deal that covers our recoupment, so they will start recouping quite quickly. But yeah, I mean, that's generally how I think it's not particularly complicated. I think it's far more complex probably in scripted than in non-scripted.
Is it, Richard?
Yeah.
Well, yes. And also talent demanding back-end positions, heavy, strong back-end positions.
Well, I mean, you know, everybody sees now that, you know, it's about 3 minutes worth of executive producers on a show before you actually start to watch it. And, you know, that's just a way of the agents getting more for the talent. I mean, I was out with one of the main agents last night, and the demands that have been asked for, I think that, again, I think, you know, with what's happened at Netflix, there is a sort of level of uncertainty, I would say, at the moment. People are going to think a lot more carefully about what they spend and on what. And I think it's about to be a huge advantage to the UK and European producers, particularly who are able to make shows for $2 million an episode that look fantastic. But in America, everyone's like, it's got to be 5, it's got to be 5, you know. Well, there isn't as much around to spend on those sorts of shows. And some of these smaller shows are doing fantastic numbers for Netflix, for Amazon, for, you know, all of the above. So budgets are going to change, and that's going to impact on what agents can ask us for their talent, which at the moment is the earth.
Yeah. I've got a question here. How has the pandemic affected the CoPro landscape?
I think
so. Was it stronger?
I think it has got stronger. I think everyone probably in this room has found it easier to talk to people and get access to people because of Zoom or Google Meets or whatever. So I think it's been. I feel like a lot of our producers are more educated in the process as a result of it. And I think also, you know, I went to the summit that you produced, and it felt to me like there was a real, I don't know, we've all had to become more tenacious because of the pandemic, and I think in the room there was this real sense that people wanted to embrace that tenacity and actually thought, you know what, I kind of like doing this. I like working with someone in France and someone in Germany, and so I think that it's just kind of expedited what was already going to happen.
And I certainly know from Asian producers that I'm working with that they have felt, it's a generalization of course, but they felt for a long time like the West was being the masters and would fly in and drop in DOPs and whatever. And now, because that hasn't been possible, they feel that finally their camera work and their production teams are getting an equal say in how co-pros work, which is terrific.
The pandemic just changed the whole landscape a little bit in the way that it boosted, for example, AVOD, right?
Yeah.
And so some AVOD players that weren't able to even think about going to CoPro or pre-sale 2 years ago, 3 years ago, they might now be. And that is probably the interesting thing. And I think it's very important, at least from our experience. So the other panels, the other models that we saw, may be private money or somebody who comes in with cash. It's all good to get things maybe finance cash flow wise, but in the end, what we need is every project needs to be a business case and profitable in itself, right? So if the money comes from Richard or from Villa, it doesn't matter. They want to make back the money, and if they don't, they won't work with us anymore, right? So the important thing is that may they be preset partners or later on licensed partners, we need to have the broadcasters to still pay the money or get money from AVOD or SVOD players or whatever. And I think the interesting thing in the VOD space being grown up now is that the long term, or let's say the shelf life of a project has become way longer, because like in the linear world back then, it was 3 years license period. Yeah. After that, you had to hope for the buyer relicense the project, because otherwise you won't make money at all, right? Whereas meanwhile, the 4-year-old content sits alongside the new content and still
returns revenue.
Right? And for the next 7 years or 8 or 9 or 10 years. Yeah. I think that's very interesting, but that also plays into what I said before, that the producer might need to think about here and there, do we necessarily need to get all the money and our profit up front, or can we maybe defer it to later?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, isn't it? Do we look at this much more over the long term?
To be fair, I think a lot of producers here in the UK do that already. They kind of barely charge for their own costs and hope that they'll make a profit further down the line from distribution, because that's the only way they can get it off the ground.
And is that little because of the rights position of indies in the UK, really, which doesn't apply in other countries? So because we own the rights.
Yeah, and I think that was a really sort of interesting comment at the end of the last session about, but you've all got to get your heads around letting go of your IP.
Yes.
That's
I know, I thought that caused ripples.
IP is the North Star, that's what everybody...
And on that fabulous segue, Richard, to your maximising of IP. So drama, I'm thinking particularly of House 2 and Murder in House 2. I listened to the podcast over the weekend. It was absolutely fantastic. So, and it's talking about, that's a great example of a drama, and that now you've also got the focus on doing that as a factual programme plus a podcast. Tell us a little bit about that, because that's all maximising the IP, isn't it?
So that was Murder in House 2, just very briefly, was the story of the biggest massacre in Haditha in Iraq by not Royal Marines, US Marines, and became the longest, most expensive trial in the US for a war crimes trial. Michael Epstein, the director, and Buccaneer came together, where Michael became a part of the defense team and filmed over 10 years or so, and made this sort of very powerful docu-film about the whole event. That sort of happened and then left, and it was done in 2018, and then in lockdown we were a bit bored, and so we thought, well, actually this would make a great podcast, because there was 117 hours of footage, and it always felt as though the story had been slightly too condensed. And so we were able to sort of pull it out, and over 10 episodes created the podcast of the story, which has subsequently been picked up by somebody in LA who wants to make that into a drama, close-ended drama. So that, of course, sort of set the mind racing. And, podcasts, I think, are becoming a bigger and bigger thing. It's not necessarily a part of the co-production side of things, but ultimately it's a way for us to develop. shows in a fairly cheap way to then bring through an audience that then allows it to go further and beyond. So we'll be doing a lot more in that space. Yeah.
Thank you. Question here: CoPro opportunities for formats. It's an interesting question.
I haven't ever managed to do that.
Have you not?
No. When the closest I got, I think, was when I was at RDF, and we had Scrap Heap Challenge, and we did have American contestants and British contestants. So we commissioned, but it was still paid for by Channel 4, and then we sold it to the States. But that's the problem. Generally in formats, they're kind of, entertainment shows, aren't they?
Yeah.
Where the viewers like to see
their own people, the people that look like them in the things. Yeah, Gerrit, tell us a bit more about your model, because it is different, and about how you're working with FAST and AVOD, and how you're sort of maximising your content across that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the most has been said already. We're looking really for ideas and shows, or let's say documentary series, factual entertainment series, that have potential as a long form show as well as short form. So it can either be or even be vice versa, right? So mainly we're working on long form stuff that we cut down into more short form and try to really get the most of it. But it can also be short form content that we start on, let's say Snapchat, and then grow it into longer form content. And that was what we're doing on the editorial side. And when it comes to partnerships, the start is always, the discussion with the producer and a good idea, ideally. And then we really try to get this off the ground in a partnership way, right? So we try to get as much from ourselves. Means ideally the constellation is that the producer doesn't have any hard out-of-pocket costs, so no risk on the producer side. Maybe, as we said before, they need to defer the profits, or let's say in-house editing suites that are written off already, maybe that needs to be deferred. The usual fee that would be put in the calculation needs to be deferred to later. But the lower the calculation, the lower the budget is, the easier it is for us to get it off the ground and to actually have something to make money off, right? And that is the real goal for us, because as soon as we do, I'm 100% convinced that we have everything that we need to have to make a good performance out of this and to make money out of this. And as I said before, we don't necessarily need to make back the money within the first 6 months, because there is a long shelf life, and there is, the whole VOD, the whole platform, non-linear space is just growing and growing and growing. So in 2 years' time, there is even more potential in this kind of exploitation, right? Yep. And more revenues to be made.
Which is why Pipe set up.
Yeah.
Yes.
Probably. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. Lilla, you've evolved really the role of Drive, haven't you, where you're becoming sort of co-producers yourself with some programs, particularly if you're bringing in broadcasters and funding. Do you want to tell us a bit?
Yeah, so, there are sort of two scenarios in which we kind of call ourselves co-producers. One is where we are raising the lion's share of the money, because there will be ideas that are brought to us. Generally, we'll always say to indies, please come to us with an idea that's already got some broadcast finance attached. And that's almost less about the money and more about the kudos of having a broadcaster attached, so that when we take it out to the rest of the world, they get some reassurance that the kind of local broadcasters back the project. But if someone's brought us something particularly special, and by special, I normally mean there's some access, and that could be a person, a place, an institution, maybe it's an archive, but something that makes it feel quite unique. Then in those instances, we will often be prepared to take the show out and start pitching without any money attached. And if we end up raising the lion's share of the money, then we would expect to take an additional percentage of the net receipts on top of our standard distribution commission. And so in that respect, we do become a bit more of a co-production partner. And we also do get editorially quite involved in the project. And then the other thing that we've started to do more recently is actually, there's a rare occasion here and there where Ben or I in the office will actually have an idea. And that idea is kind of off the back of a conversation we've had with the broadcaster. And I think, hang on a minute,
That's a good
I really like a show about this. And so a really good example of that is a series, actually, we're just now in production on series 2 of it, called Strangest Things. And it's a histories, mysteries idea. And so we kind of came up with that idea, kind of workshopped it in the office, and then I thought, well, who's the best producer to make histories, mysteries shows that we know well, we've already got a good relationship with, and that was Blink. So we took the idea to Blink and said, look, we think this is a good idea. We're pretty convinced that we could go out and raise the finance for it, but we need you to kind of bring the editorial rigor to it, to develop it, and obviously all of your production expertise. But we will be going 50-50. We're happy to invest some of our money in it too, but, but they like the idea and they're quite a can-do company, so that's what we did. And we went out and raised the finance, and now we're in series 2, and we've actually just recently done another one with them of that ilk that we brought Curiosity Stream on board for.
Richard, looking at your models, and when we talked in preparation for this panel, you were talking about the range of the different models and how one almost has to have a portfolio of different models rather than sitting with the one model. Is that because some deliver a greater upfront, so you can juggle more with company costs, and some deliver more with a longer tail?
I think it's just really more about being flexible in what is a rapidly changing market, and it's taking care of the broadcasters who have always been there, and at the same time realizing that there's other things going on. But in terms of how you set those things up, it really, at the end of it, it comes down to how much is it going to cost to make.
Yeah.
And, I think to cobble together a scripted show over £2.5 million is quite tough doing it with just the broadcast world. But we set up, apparently there's no broadcasters in here. No, but I think we set ourselves up not to be beholden to the UK broadcast community. It's not that it's an international slate, but it's the stories come from anywhere. People could relate to the stories from anywhere. And therefore, we're not just sitting and waiting for the BBC or ITV or Channel 4 or 5 or whoever it may be to kickstart the process of getting a show made. We, of course, deal with all of them, and we have shows with some of them, and that's great. But I think if you're only thinking like that, I think you're probably going to find yourself in a bit of trouble not too distant future, because the world is becoming the world. I mean, it is about the world.
And you can see that even with some of the groupings together of the public service broadcasters. In Asia, there's the Asian TAP, which is sort of Taiwan and Korea and Singapore. The Nordics as well are doing that, aren't they? So it's all about sort of group power in order to make yourselves bigger to punch up, through the models.
And I think there's an issue with, it's like Garrett was talking about setting up his co-production Tinder dating.
Tinder dating.
Really set it up for
And he just wants
himself.
to
CoPro Club. It's CoPro Club.
Swipe right.
But I notice this a lot. When I'm meeting with broadcasters outside the UK, they are, to use the word tenacious again, at collaborating, and they're now formalising that much more, and they're coming up with names called like the Big Five and things like that. But the British broadcasters, and I don't want this to turn into a massive British broadcaster bashing session, but they seem to be, they're really, really excited about making friends with North America. They make very little effort with anyone else.
No,
and that has to change.
That's, look at that pin. You could hear a pin drop as everybody computes that. It's true, isn't it? And what are your biggest markets, Richard, for your dramas? Is it US? Is the reason the focus is so much on the US because it is sort of the world's biggest market, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's still the biggest market. It's still the most money. If you take a show to the US that's story is centered in Germany, then they're going to be, why is there no German broadcaster on board? If they're not interested, why are we interested?
Yeah.
But, yes, we do gear some of our shows towards being very expensive, very US orientated. But, to Lilla's point about these European broadcasters coming together, they've had to come together.
Yeah.
And it's not always easy. They are, in the first place, companies coming at the world from a different angle, and secondly, cultures coming from slightly different angles. And so pulling all of that together can be quite fraught. But I think it's being driven by necessity now more than anything. And I'm finding the people in positions of power at the bigger broadcasters now are people that understand that. And therefore, that's becoming easier to have those conversations. It's never easy, but it's easier.
I have a very specific question here for you, Gerrit. Do you share your AVOD data with producers?
With the partners we do, yeah.
So whoever asked that, he does. Yeah. In fact, that's an interesting thing as well, isn't it, about sharing information? And there have been some interesting conversations today.
Yeah, that's what we the question we hear a lot. So that's obviously very interesting for the partners, and I don't see a reason why not. Because in the end, it's helpful, right? Especially if we want to do
you're cooperating,
then it's cool if he also knows about the shows and what works and what doesn't work. So
if I was to ask you to sort of predict the future, Richard, what would you say in terms of CoPros? Is it a sure
exhaustion?
I think we all feel that. But there's no way they're going away, is there? If anything, the relationships will become more ingrained, if you like. I would think.
I think there's a long way to run in the requirement for content, and I think we're probably not yet seeing all the parties that are going to try to play in this game. I think there's going to be some very interesting new entries. You're joking about Tinder, but at Series Mania the other day, the big CoPro market, one of the headline sponsors was Tinder. And in my mind, I was thinking, hang on, they're clearly going to come into the space in some, whether it's short form or long form, who knows? But you've got, Tubi and Roku, and so there's plenty of places to go to, and that's not going to change. I think though, budgets will change. I think models of how it's funded will change. I think the other than probably the likes of Disney and probably Netflix, you'll see a lot more SVOD services working together, working with broadcasters, not taking on all of the risk. And then also, it's a world that's starting to be driven more and more and more by data. And that data will then feed into what the producers have as conversations with them.
And you touched on an interesting thing there. There was the time with SVODs where it was all right, but even they now, Lilla, you've talked about this, even they now beginning to compromise on how they have to work in different territories.
I think the two things I'd say is it will change and it won't change. So you'll see, we'll still be scrabbling around trying to build this kind of patchwork of financiers on shows. There will be the differences who those people are and how they work. So there'll be new entries to market. There'll be, as you said, more AVOD probably money coming into co-production. I think particularly in the non-scripted space, I think particularly in history, because that just seems to knock it out of the park in AVOD. Also, I think we'll see a change in rights. And some more flexibility. I'm the eternal optimist, so of course I'm going to say that. But I think that probably will happen.
So I think it's going to be even more. So the whole thing will be put together by even further and more smaller pieces. Because what happens is, whereas like 20 years ago we had 10 broadcasters and all of the content went to one of these broadcasters and they combined the full money that was in the market, right, to spend on the content. But now we got AVOD channels, we got fast channels, which in the US are big, but in Europe are very small, but they might grow up.
They'll be growing,
But they won't go to a budget of a broadcaster 5 years ago, but they might have money in a couple of years' time to spend on commissions or co-production, whatever, but it's going to be smaller money. So it's going to be a bit of money from that fast channel, from that AVOD channel, from that internet page from that brand, maybe. So I think,
in truth, though, it'll end up being companies like ours who subsidise all of that, and we'll go, you know what, we'll put it in and we'll do those deals.
Yeah, I think we as distributors probably need to be even more or become experts not only in how to get money from broadcasters or outlets of editorial content, but maybe even from brands from out of the industry, potential players, right?
Well, I think that's the other thing, actually, is it would be interesting to see whether channels who historically have had to be quite strict about other forms of money coming into shows, less in scripted, but definitely in non-scripted, it's been. And I wonder if there will be a loosening of the rules there.
Regarding branded and ad-funded programming. Yeah, and I think there will have to be, because I think increasingly we're all facing a thing where the license fee money that we get for any one slot is now only just the smallest part. It's just the beginning of the conversation. Not to mention the broadcasters who say, well, you've got a commission, but we can't give you anything for it. So the whole business about piecing together the jigsaw, the funding, largely falls on our shoulders. So, Richard, what's a great CoPro in terms of an SVOD and a pre-sale or whatever? What's a really good one where you think, yes, this can work commercially immediately?
If you're doing a CoPro with another production company, you can't just go into it because you like the idea. You've got to get to know the people you're going to work with. And, the one that we've just been through, there was healthy debate the whole way through. Yep. It wasn't everyone going, yes, I agree, yes, I agree. And it was clear from fairly early on that we were going to end up with a really strong show based on differences of opinions that ended up as sensible conversation as to why.
It's really constructive.
And it does need to be. And
so almost greater than the sum of the parts.
I think the project is, I really do. There's very experienced people on it, and there were young voices in it, and the whole thing felt very collaborative. And we just started the pitching process on that, and the early response has been incredibly strong. So that was exciting to be a part of. I think in some ways that's easier than to commissioning broadcasters coming together, because that can often feel like mum and dad fighting after a couple of drinks. And that's harder.
That's a great way of putting it. And Lila, what's your,
I'm going to sound really lazy now. Our ideal CoPro is one that's really easy to do. It's the one that, yes, I think you're absolutely right. You want the editorial partners to both, ideally it's just two of them, but often it's more, but for them to all bring something to the table that enhances the project. But our ideal CoPro is always, it starts out obviously with a brilliant idea attached to a brilliant production company. And the brilliant idea is often, as I said before, kind of is access related. It's something that, the minute you read it, you think whoever I pitch this to is going to think this is exciting.
Is going to get this,
and so, the story does a lot of the work for you, in fairness.
And Gerrit, with your CoPro Club, not Tinder, your CoPro Club, what would be great outcomes from it? And not, in terms of collaboration or genre pushing, or is it just a straightforward way to solve a problem?
I mean, the interesting thing about the CoPro Club so far was that though we are very experienced from 15 years of doing distribution, it wasn't necessarily the projects where we thought this will get the highest hits, that they always got the highest hits, but it was maybe smaller ones. Or we just realized, oh, hold on, just because these two partners are on board there and that fits with our footprint and the budget is not that high, we can actually realize that, though this just made it into the CoPro Club just, at the last call. So what's the best project for us? Bit like Lila, so the easiest, the less partners are in there, the better, because we can be more creative, especially if we are one of the bigger partners, because we can be more creative than the broadcaster, and then it has higher potential later on in sales, right? If not, so many territories are gone up front. So that's pretty much it.
And the future for each of you immediately, is it to do more of the same?
I mean, I think, we've just set up a company in Scotland. which we've done with the actor Dougray Scott. That was, again, it's just entirely based on voice. When we were making Crime, the Irvine Welsh project up in Scotland, it became really apparent, Scotland's got such a rich history of literature. And yet, looking around, I'm thinking, hang on a minute, there's no Scottish writers getting big Netflix shows and so really using, Irvine and Dougray as a sort of, this loud voice of Scotland to say, come, there is a home here. Come with your stories. And it's been like that we've got going with these unbelievable writers. And so I think we'll look probably for more voices around the world
That's interesting, really authentic.
We started with Scandinavian voices. For ages, the English-speaking countries were going to Scandinavia to remake what they were making brilliantly, and then you go and what we did eventually was go to the writers of the Bridge. And,
absolutely.
And then you just sort of smash their culture of sort of growing up with Norse myth and our culture of Shakespeare and shove that together, and you get some really interesting
something
things.
Really original.
So more of that would be what we're trying to do. And as I say, podcast is becoming a thing for us as well. It's trying to staff up around lots of productions.
Thank you, Lila.
Well, until this afternoon, I was going to try and get a documentary financed through NFTs, but since Lizzie pointed out
that's interesting.
Legal minefields and costs, I'm rethinking that.
Oh, are you really? That's interesting.
Genuinely, I'm not joking. These guys all heard me wax lyrical on Friday about how I wanted to kind of experiment with it so that we could inform the producers we work with about it.
Yeah,
but it's really interesting now thinking about the legal minefield and those potential costs, and you suddenly think, hang on a minute, and that's the tricky thing to navigate. So, but that said, we definitely look. It's our responsibility as the company that we are to explore all new financial opportunities. That's what we kind of promise to the producers we work with, that we'll always be at the sort of vanguard of wherever the money's coming from. But that aside, we'll carry on doing what we're doing, which is we turn over every stone and we meet every new broadcaster, whether they be an SVOD, an AVOD, linear, whatever. That's what we do.
And just keep working at it. It's hard work, don't it? Garrett, what about yourself?
Well, we will try to grow, or we very likely grow in every aspect. That means to grow the channels that we have already, grow the number of channels that we have, so go more into the niche stuff even, which is going to be exciting, because the more niche you are, sometimes the easier it gets to be outstanding in that field, because there's not so much professional content in that niche, and then grow onto other platforms even further. So the ideal constellation would be that from our outlets, plenty of outlets that we have, we can just finance the content just by ourselves, because that's the quickest,
and just keep it.
To just say, that's a good idea, let's go for it. And we're not there yet. That's what we need the CoPro Club for, to get external partners on board for projects as quickly as possible, but we're on the way.
Thank you, Richard, Lila, and Garrett. Thank you very much indeed, guys. Can we give them a round of applause?
Well, that's about it for this week's show. And that was the final panel session we're replaying from the event. If you haven't heard the others, you can find them all at TellyCast.com. Thanks again to all our panellists that took part and everybody who came along on the day. TellyCast was edited by Ian Chambers and recorded at Lincoln's Inn in London. Until next week's show, when we'll be previewing next month's NEM in Dubrovnik, as always, stay safe.
Global producers, distributors, and rights holders, why are you waiting for license fee payments from your productions, both new and back catalogue? Pipe buys your entertainment receivables and turns it into upfront capital immediately. Pipe can help you pull forward up to 5 years worth of contracted license fees from all the major streamers and broadcasters, so you can use the capital to produce more, acquire more, finance more, and grow your business on your own terms. Sign up today at pipe.com/entertainment. That's pipe.com/entertainment and start fast forwarding your receivables now.